Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video we're going to be going over the details that came out of the letter from the producer live LI. Is that 51? I'm not all too boned up on my Roman numerals, but this was the big live letter. This was a live letter everyone was waiting for to go over major new features for 5.0. They went over some of the features they'd already announced, elaborated on some new ones we'd never heard about before, and of course went over the job skills that we were going to be obtaining. Now, I want a full disclosure here at the beginning of the video because I did this very wrong 2 years ago. I have attended the North American Media Tour for Final Fantasy XIV. At that media tour, we were allowed to play on a build for basically a full day where we got to experience some of the content that we are going to be talking about today. That being said, I will not reveal any details from that media tour that are not directly said in this live letter. All that information will be publicly available on May 29th at 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, at which point I will be posting a video for every single job that was available, plus ambiguous other features and other things that were available as well. So I'm giving you a full disclosure there. I'm going to be acting a little dumb here because I'm being very careful. So apologies in advance, but felt that was really important to give to you guys. With that, they luckily did a great job of revealing a lot of stuff that I can now talk about without going too crazy, to at least let us get a general idea of what to expect. And all I can say is this live letter did not make it any easier to decide what to play. It made it way harder to decide what I want to play going into the expansion. Now, it started off with some basic, by the way, thank you to my Twitch chat, and there was an Imgur post on Reddit. If I could get from my Twitch chat credit for whoever posted this, it just says uploaded 2 hours ago. If I could get some credit for whoever actually posted this right here, I would definitely appreciate that from my Twitch chat. I'll come back to it after this, because the first few slides are just going over the stuff we already knew. New jobs, new areas, 6 new massive areas, getting some adjustments, new beast tribes, Trust, Hrothgar, Vera. This is a recap of all stuff we already knew. And then they went into new stuff altogether. So the first thing is the fate system. They are going to be adding basically reasons to do fates outside of leveling. And yeah, fates currently have like an occasional minion or an occasional, other reward like a triple triad card. By the way, it says it was from the Reddit user Valentin. So thank you, Valentin, for posting this Imgur folder of all these different slides and stuff that were actually shown. But now they're going to be adding what they claimed are kind of like almost like zone-based rewards, where fates in specific zones come with specific tokens. And you can see this right here, and we will, of course, have to, I guess, adjust the way. I should maybe make a separate thing altogether. But we can always just kind of do it on the fly. You guys can see it a little bit better than I can, in all honesty. Where when you complete fates in a zone, you earn currency for that zone, and you earn, I guess, gradually unlock as you complete more fates. More rewards. It sounds very akin to Beast Tribes, but basically per zone, you're going to be able to earn rewards by repeating fates over and over again. So with these unique tokens at the specialty shops, we have some things listed here, since it may be a little bit hard to read for our mobile users. An Orchestrion roll, a butterfly specimen. There's a riding map, which traditionally have been obtained from allied seals and Centurio seals, but this is a new zone with a riding map, which means we may actually get access to these almost sooner than anticipated, considering they're already here. It's also got a bunch of crafting materials, and there's no telling if this is a fully available shop or just some of the things that are available in it. But trying to inject a little bit more life into the fate system. You can still use them to level, but you can also use it for this. There was no mention of keeping the bonus EXP feature from Stormblood, but I'd like to assume that it would also be available. Side quests are also getting a little bit of an adjustment to help with people who want to use them for leveling. All 5.0 side quests can be undertaken at level 70, and the enemies you fight for those quests will be scaled to your level, basically making them like all the Beast Tribe quests, which had the scaled enemies as well. This is going to be good for if you're ever stuck at a certain level range, or you just want to use side quests to level another job. It should feel smooth. You could go to any of the zones, complete any of the side quests you might be missing, instead of being like, well, I'm 73, so I don't have any 73 available, so I have to wait till 75 to do the other ones. So you're going to have a lot more freedom when it comes to doing your side quests and how you want to obtain them. I'm someone who classically doesn't complete them, but this system I find quite useful and may actually get me to complete much more of the side quests that are available. Moving on to role quests, this has been a pretty hot topic since it was first unveiled. They are going to be adding 4 sets of role quests that are going to retrace the journeys of the first fallen heroes. In the back, we can see some familiar faces. We can only see 4 of them because there's only 4 role quests that are available. physical DPS, magical DPS, tank, and healer. Now, with that, we're wondering, I was kind of expecting Bard, Machinist, and Dancer to kind of say physical ranged, but I guess they're just lumping those into physical, and then magical will be Black Mage, Summoner, Red Mage, based on what's said right here. So there's going to be multiple quest lines, but you need to complete at least one of them in order to advance the main scenario. So whichever role you're initially leveling through the 70 to 80 range, but with the lore attached to it, you're probably going to want to complete all 4. Now, the new jobs, Dancer and Gunbreaker, will also have quests available from 60 to 70, but as for the existing jobs, their job quest will not become available until level 80. And also, it says all jobs, so Gunbreaker and Dancer would, of course, have another quest at level 80 as well. So it seems to me, based on this, that they're kind of trying to shift from job-focused quests into role-focused quests. And this kind of makes sense. The more jobs you add to a game, it's basically this never-ending addition of dialogue that you have to constantly be adding for each individual job. And it pretty much means that the stories for those jobs never have complete closure because they always have to open a new door going forward. It seems that this consolidates that a lot, allows them to bring us much more focused lore instead of focusing on specifically the lore of the jobs. But it does come with the disadvantage of, I love some of the job quests. I love the Monk quest. I love the Dragoon quest, the Dark Knight quest. And the idea of not being able to, I guess, experience as much of that is a little bit frightening. But we need to see these level 80 quests, and we need to see how good the actual role quests are before we judge it all too much. Moving on to crafting and gathering, they're going to be adding 5 new sets of quests for these as well. And these are going to be stories centered around the Crystarium and a collective of artisans. We have for the Disciples of Hand, the facets of forging, crafting, and nourishment, and for the Disciples of Land, the facets of gathering and fishing. So more story-based quests for crafters and gatherers, which is something I kind of appreciate. I remember the Goldsmith quests in particular being very interested in those, even though I'm not very much of a crafter. Now it says hone your skills as you progress through the story of the Crystalline Mean, which is the name of the area which all of these crafters and gatherers are going to have, I guess, kind of like a centralized hub for. Now, hone your skills. I don't know if that means like you're going to be learning new skills between 70 to 80, or if you're going to just, I guess, almost like a Hall of the Novice, I guess, for crafters. But it feels like if it was that, it was going to be like, would you really want to do that as late as level 70 to 80? I wouldn't, but who knows? It could just be fancy PR talk for, hey, just do it. They mentioned on stream that these were kind of like collectibles in a sense. So I guess if you're familiar with that system, it might help you through this system. There's also no mention of the Ishgard quests. So I'm beginning. I didn't really think those would be available at 5.0, but now I hope they don't occur too late into the expansion. Hopefully by like a 5.11 or a 5.15, because there's no mention of them here, and this is like the big live letter. So we'll just have to wait and see. But more lore, more everything about the first is always good. User interface, we are getting the addition of a new theme, the light skin. Now, if you've done any PvP, you probably recognize this. It's already the skin used for that. I'm a dark mode user. Most people I know are dark mode users, but for me, that's not how I'm interpreting this. I like the idea of us being able to adjust the skins of our UI, because who says they have to stop at light skin? That's my takeaway from this. It's not a feature I'll use, but who knows, maybe we could get like I remember like 3 or 4 years ago, they mentioned, because they weren't really focusing too much on add-ons or making an API available, that they had mentioned something like a classic Final Fantasy skin. And for me, that kind of resonates at that like bluish purple that gradients into black with the kind of like silver outlines. And I want that. I would love menus that represent things like that. And I hope they don't stop at light skins with this just because it was available for PvP. That is something I would definitely use, but for now, I'm going to stick to dark mode. Now, they showed this in-game. Again, if I zoom in, unfortunately, it screws up a little bit with the, actually showing everything. But you can still get a basic idea. I'm not into it, man. And I don't think they hovered over any dancer gear here, which is unfortunate because I know that's a big question that everybody has. So scrolling back out, more user interface stuff, cross-world link shells. We're going to be expanding from 1 of them to 8 of them. They had mentioned that they were going to be working on making link shell functionality and cross-server functionality much more in tune with each other. I actually didn't expect it for 5.0 launch. That was something that I had figured would probably come sometime at 5.x. But your hunt link shells, your casual chat link shells, all that stuff, you're going to have complete freedom. There's also no mention of them expanding it from 64 to a larger number of people. So I think expanding the number of link shells available, it was probably first priority. And I feel like they've mentioned that prior. But what else? I'm not gonna say no to 8 channels of cross-world link shells. Target information has also been adjusted where now you can see into the decimals. Now, for anyone who plays on PC, you're looking at this going, ACT already did that. But it's a good feature overall to have for A, non-ACT users, and B, console users, which is always something that you have to consider. Now when we have our 1%, now we won't have 1% wipes on our final bosses for Ultimates or Savages. Now we'll have 0.1% wipes, and I'm sure that feels so much better. Party list information is going to be updated. Okay, that's it's not really a whole lot to expand there. And housing furnishing placement preview is going to be added. So you'll be able to preview housing furnishings before you place them. Good feature. I'm not a big housing user, but I'm never going to say no to quality of life. Going on to battle system changes, they're going to be adding a bunch of stuff here. Now, this isn't getting into the nitty-gritty of jobs, just to be clear. The charged action system will allow certain actions to save charges for later use. The example they give right here is that as you are fighting in combat, obviously, for Monk, for example, shoulder tackle will gradually have its charge time go through. When the charge time finishes, it'll store one shoulder tackle, and then it'll keep charging up to store a second one. So you could use 2 shoulder tackles back to back. So this is a skill that you can expect to see for a variety of other jobs. They had mentioned one other skill was Kasatsu that was going to be seeing a charge, and when we watch the job trailer later, you'll actually be able to get an idea of that. That's going to be a separate video altogether. And that just gives you a little bit more freedom. Now, instead of having to use a skill as soon as one charge available, it only becomes inefficient to hold on to not using a skill when the second charges become available. So you now have the, the complexities of deciding, is it good to hold 2 charges for a certain burst phase for something? Is it good to hold one for utility versus one for your general damage rotation fitting into a buff period? It's a very versatile system, and it's something I'm glad to see them doing. It's very, very WoW-esque. A lot of this stuff is very WoW-esque, and I feel like with the recent popularity of WoW refugees, it's good to be seeing things like this because it allows our combat system to evolve in a different way. We need to see it actually in use, because who knows if this doesn't just end up being more complicated openers at the end of the day. But I'm hoping that it does ultimately with their, battle design allow us to actually be more flexible with skills like this. Moving forward, they actually showed one of Dancer's skills. They showed a bunch of other Dancer skills later. I'm actually going to, I guess you don't really need to zoom in because I'm zoomed in enough on the actual recording, but Enavant is the ability we see here for Dancer, and it is an ability with 3 charges. The charge time is 30 seconds, and it quickly dashes forward. So basically, it's one of their, gap closers, gap creators, their mobility skills. And it having 3 charges, they used it on stream, and it was incredibly elegant. It's a very short range. I believe they said on the live stream it was 10 yalms, even though it only shows the 0 yalm action here. I don't think it actually says that on the tooltip, but they said that during the live stream. And it's just another way of showing the charge system. They basically showed that while you can use a skill, let's say you use a skill and half the charge is done, it doesn't reset the charge. It's just going to keep ticking down from whatever point that it was. So it doesn't interrupt the actual recharge time of the skill. So I think it's a good thing, and I hope to see it used interestingly across the various jobs. Now, casting interruption system, I saw a lot of people bugging out over this in my Twitch chat. And it just seems to be a consolidation of the silence effect at the very least, because they only mentioned silence here. But it's basically for adding for more clarity. If a skill is interruptible, it will more clearly show that in your user interface. This screenshot only shows what the interrupted section looks like, but that's still a change, because previously when you interrupted a skill, the cast bar just disappeared. And that was the only way you had any way of knowing that a skill was interruptible. Now it kind of glows, it's bolder, and when you interrupt it, it lets you know the skill was actually interrupted. So it's one of those quality of life changes that is mostly there for clarity. It doesn't seem to be anything like, I saw other people wondering if it was like WildStar's break system, or I think Guild Wars 2 has a system similar to that. At least based on this slide, it seems to only be a consolidation of the silence effect. And they specifically mentioned that tanks and ranged DPS will receive roll actions for that purpose. Now, the use of the term roll actions caught a lot of people by surprise. I myself thought roll actions were almost certainly being gotten rid of, but only because they didn't really make sense. And it seemed like they had just kind of given up on the idea when we just unlocked all of them in 4.4. But all they're removing is the customization of roll actions. Every role now has a set number of actions. You'll automatically learn them at certain levels. And depending on your role, you may have more or less actions altogether. So tanks, for example, have a whopping 7 actions, some of which we got to see on the Gunbreaker hotbar later, whereas magical range DPS are just a measly 4, which makes sense considering I know a lot of magical DPS who didn't like using the majority of their actions anyway. Moving forward, MP and TP, if you've been paying attention for the last 6 or 7 months, this shouldn't be much of a surprise. TP was removed. They told us at the North American Fan Festival back in November that this was going to be happening. Much more to people's surprise was the capping of MP at a value of 10,000. Now that was to, I guess they kind of realized that all spells were already a percentage of your MP anyway, so it doesn't ultimately really change anything about the way any of the MP consuming jobs play. What does change that, though, is the fact that Piety no longer increases maximum MP, but they said on the live stream that it would instead affect the recharge rate of MP. So your mana regeneration will be tied to Piety, and we need to see how much that's really required. That's going to be a big balancing thing that people are going to be paying very close attention to for all of the mana users. As for TP users, all of their skills that were TP before are just free. So your AoEs that you had before, your single target abilities, anything that cost TP before just doesn't cost TP. That's it. And also keep in mind the Piety attribute is still healer only. My Twitch chat just pointed that out. Yes, Piety is still a healer only thing. It is not something summoners or red mages will be using. Moving on to main attributes. The difficulty in gearing up will be adjusted for each role. Now that sentence, people see the word difficulty, they kind of freak out. But they went into a lot of depth here. That seems to imply that they're targeting the use of main stat materia on armor. The attributes for all accessories will be revised. Now, they didn't explicitly say they were adding main stats to other gear. They didn't say, hey, we're adding vitality to this gear and we're adding strength to tank gear. What they did say is they looked at the trends of how people were using main stat materia and adjusted accessories accordingly. That tells me what I just said, but they never explicitly said it. So we just have to wait and see on that one. Main attribute increasing materia will no longer be meldable or obtainable. Now that doesn't mean that your current main stat materia will just disappear into the void. You can still use it for gambling at the transmutation in Central Thanalan, which is probably going to be the most popular use for it when the expansion comes out. And any gear you have that's currently melded, it'll just do nothing. So, you can replace it now. It shouldn't matter, whatever, going into the expansion. You're going to replace all your gear anyway. And on top of that, they're buffing the weekly token gear, as well as savage accessories and belts, and giving them 2 materia slots. This is to make it so they can better compete with the pentamelds of the crafted accessories. So it should be clearer to people that this armor should be a more reasonable improvement over belts. And that makes sense when you consider how much main stat and how much substat you should be getting as an increase, on top of the other adjustments they seem to be implying with accessories. And then on top of the fact that you can now meld 2 of your highest tier materia, assuming they keep that entire system in place. There was no mention of a higher tier of materia, of changing the tiers of materia, only mention of this. It's the only thing we learned about materia today. For the pet system, pet management and usage will be revised. Pets are no longer able to be hurt by enemies, and they cannot be affected by PC actions. I read that, and a lot of people started thinking about the tanking Eggies. I thought about, times where it's been beneficial to cast like an Adlo on your fairy, for example, in order to do the spread. And this becomes undoable with something like that. So that's a pretty major change. It means you really don't have to micromanage them in terms of their placement and where they are on the battlefield, but it does mean that you won't be able to make use of anything you may have been making use of before when you were doing that effect. Pet actions will be removed from the pet hotbar, and then pet actions will be categorized as player actions. They explain this a little bit more in the next slide. Of course, they have to make adjustments to the tanks, but they didn't go into too much detail on that. Now, basically, what used to be, for example, you can see that Ifrit had Crimson Cyclone, Titan had Earthen Armor, and Garuda had Aerial Slash. Those used to be on the pet hotbar. Now they're not on the pet hotbar anymore. Instead, the player has an action that will command the pet to execute these actions. Now, we don't know much more about it like that, but it basically consolidates all the different buttons your pets used to have into a button that's accessible based on the pet you have available. So, hopefully that should give you a little bit more control. However, there's concern over specifically Garuda's current ability to use things like Contagion while you are still casting. That's the one disadvantage to the system that people are, you know, asking questions about. Will they still be able to use their pet skills while they are casting other abilities now that they are being redefined as player actions? For that, just have to wait and see. Additional system battle adjustments, calculations, basic calculations. They do this every expansion. Every time you go up a level, your calculations change. No different here. Chain bonuses have been removed from dungeons. However, they've standardized EXP. That way, every time you do a dungeon, regardless of the speed of the dungeon, you should know how much EXP you're getting out of it based on what level you are and based on how many of the monsters you kill. So that should be much clearer to people now. And the damage limit, just the damage that can possibly be taken or dealt, is being raised from just under 1 million to just under 10 million. Now, the only time you really see these numbers are when you hit enrages on newer bosses. Eureka's has some funny stuff that lets you hit those numbers as well. But they even mentioned that these numbers are getting kind of ridiculous already. And I'm glad they brought it up because they seem to be implying that by the time we get to 6.0, they are going to be looking at doing what we would call a stat squish. Meaning that they are going to reduce the number so they're not as ridiculous, to make sure we don't go into those millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions points as item level continues to scale up. It also confirmed 6.0, but we knew that. Like, if you didn't think there was going to be a 6.0, just come on. But I'm glad they acknowledge that, because people have been asking when they might do a stat squish for years now, and we now have, you know, a few years down the line, we should have an idea of, you know, how that stat squish is going to go. On top of that, we have some other battle system adjustments. The party bonus, which is something most players have forgotten about, is going to be adjusted based on the number of players filling a given role. They didn't get too much more specific than that, just that your party composition and the party bonus have been adjusted. The rate at which the limit gauge fills, they very much seem to be targeting the inconsistency in LB generation based on using things such as reaching low HP or shielding damage without cooldowns or things like that. They specifically noted that some people were deliberately, during speed kills for certain bosses, trying to basically abuse limit break generation as much as possible to get faster kills. And they seem to be removing that for 5.0 and later regions. So if you do an old 4.0 boss, probably to regulate the... So I guess LB generation doesn't get, I guess, too weird, I suppose. They want to keep it the same way it was for that. But for newer stuff, expect LB generation to be a lot more streamlined. And the HP of a barrier now shows on the party list, so you can tell how much of a shield somebody has and if they have a shield altogether without just needing to look at their buffs. You know, knowing the strength of a shield is really important. You can see that the warrior, for example, barely has a visible shield. In fact, it's even hard to see past their number on the party list just because of the, I guess, size of the actual, I guess I'm not zoomed in far enough. Whereas you can see on the Scholar, the bar is a little bit bigger. And then you can see on the Black Mage, whose HP isn't full, that there's the little bit of a shield bar over there. I'm of the personal opinion, it looks kind of silly to put the shield bar over the HP bar without adjusting any of the letters or anything. I feel like they could have just as easily slapped it at either the end or the beginning of the HP bar itself. I have a feeling that if it's not changed by 5.0, I'm sure feedback will point in the direction of getting it changed to more directly overlap with the actual HP. Could be that even by the time we get 5.0, it's different, but I like the idea, but it looks kind of tacky when it appears like that. Then they moved on to rebalancing player roles. Now this is where we start to get into job balancing, because everyone has questions about tank, healer, DPS, all sorts of things. And this is more to cover their general roles. Like, what are the tanks going to be doing? What are the healers going to be doing? So this is one of the most important sections of the live letter overall. Now for job synergy, they said they were going to be reducing the effectiveness of certain synergies. A big example is slashing, blunt, and piercing resistances are going to be removed altogether. I had been clamoring for this for a while because I felt like they didn't really add anything gameplay-wise. There were passive elements that kind of forced jobs to pair together, specifically Dragoon and Bard being probably the most major problem child. On the live stream, they specifically said, oh, monks, you don't have to be alone anymore. And I'm like, thanks. Thank you. They're also going to be changing a bunch of other actions. Certain actions will be removed. You know, this is all kind of standard stuff. But they also made specific mention that the synergy of the new dancer job will be emphasized. Now, they specifically said it's not going to be emphasized to the point where you feel like you need to bring a dancer, but that dancer's identity is kind of tied in with working together with party members. So it's kind of unclear exactly what they're aiming for here, other than Dancer being more of a buffer, which they do also say later in the actual live letter. So that's one of those things that we kind of have to see in action, you know? Now, tank role jobs has been a big one because after the Japanese Fan Festival, it was mentioned that they wanted, or that they were at least currently considering, as said in my interview back then, splitting the tanks into main tank and off tank. Now, that led people concerned because they're like, why are you getting rid of the division and the healers, but you're trying to create a division inside the tank role? I had to always interpret it as any job can be main tank or off tank, but no, most certainly there will be effectiveness that leans towards one or the other. And it seems that their main goal here is to make sure that all 4 tanks can be viable as either a main tank or an off tank. You shouldn't feel bad about being a main tank on one job and an off tank on another. So, for example, all tanks are going to have defensive buffs to protect their party members. All of them are going to have buffs where they are an off tank and they can support the main tank. Whereas Paladin used to be the king of that, which is what made them an off tank king. Every job will have some degree of being able to help the main tank. And also, tanks can buff their own defenses, obviously. Come on. So basically, it doesn't matter which role you're currently fulfilling, whether you're the one pulling the boss, or you're the one taking over for the other tank because of a lack of cooldowns, you should be effective in either of those roles equally. Now, of course, job effectiveness will vary depending on player skill. It goes without saying, but that's funny. That's I'm glad they put that there. Now, for other things, the offensive stances are going to be removed. Instead, you just have a tank stance you turn on and off. Now, originally, that sounds like they're trying to push all the tanks away from dealing damage. However, they also revealed that your tank stance no longer reduces the damage you deal, or gives you any of the basic damage reductions or max HP increases that, you know, Defiance and Grit and Shield Oath provided before. Tank stance is only for enmity generation. So it's something that in a dungeon, you'll want on no matter what. It's not going to inhibit your damage and your output. You're the tank, so, you know, focus on dealing your damage and don't have to worry about much else. As for, you know, you had to imagine like an off tank, for example, wouldn't turn theirs on because they don't need enmity at the time. However, you know, there could be some fancy stuff. Later when they were going over Gunbreaker, we got to look at their hotbars, and we saw Provoke and Shirk there, so certain tools seem to still be there. We didn't see the tooltips, so we don't know if they're exactly the same, but if they are, then there may be some benefits to at least doing some of your damage in tank stance to make Shirks a little bit more, put a higher number on them. But I'm not a tank, so I probably shouldn't be talking about it. Adjustments will be made to emphasize reduced damage received aspect of tanks. When we scroll to the next tab, they specifically mentioned the Tank Mastery trait, which will make it so all tanks automatically take 20% less damage and that they will receive maximum HP and damage dealt based on certain attributes they have on their gear. On top of that, all enmity generating combos will be removed. Somebody specifically asked about Rage of Halone in the either Nico Nico or Twitch chat, and they addressed it on the stream. They said it won't be removed entirely, which implies that it would become another skill somewhat later on. Skill rotations will not change, and the big goal with tanks here is that your job rotation should be what makes you effective, not hitting a stance or not hitting a stance. So now pretty much no tank has an excuse not to be trying to output the most damage possible because they're not comfortable switching tank stances. Your whole job is, you know, built into your, you know, your trait and the skills that you have. And the way you use them determines how effective that they are. I think it's a good way for allowing new tanks to get into the role altogether. And also, you know, lets those DPS tanks still focus on how can I put out the most damage. It's still going to be their focus. So it kind of fits both roles where now they're just kind of coincided instead of being two different identities like they were before. So I'm a fan of it, and I'm looking forward to seeing how everyone else reacts to it when Shadowbringers actually comes out. Now, healers, I think, is the other big one, so I'm glad they took some time for this. Healers will be thoroughly rebalanced to emphasize the pure healing role. Sorry. Which is a very odd thing, because pure healing was something White Mage was memed on for years. The idea of healers being pure healing is a tough concept to grasp in 14, because it's never been that way, ever. Pure healing to me, as an individual, reads, the majority of the spells I cast should be healing the party. to do something like that, there needs to be enough outgoing damage. And there just hasn't been up to this point. So we need to see if that actually is what they're aiming for, you know, the ideal that I have behind it. We won't know until a later date. So they also added new actions to cover for the gaps that each healer's repertoire, specifically White Mage having an instant heal to mitigate the cast time of other abilities. Now, when I read that, I interpret it as one of the most major weaknesses of White Mage was they were like the one job that didn't have an instant cast to allow them to more freely use their off GCDs. They always had to clip their GCDs unless they were casting Arrow or Regen. I'm hoping what that means is an on GCD instant heal, so they feel more free to use their OGCDs without needing to clip the GCD. That's been my prediction. That's what my hope is based on that statement. But I wasn't super certain because the translation on stream never really said anything like that. All they kept talking about was the mobility of the job and getting it up to par with the other ones. So I don't know if that's what it's going to be. Is it going to be another OGCD or another GCD? Can't tell based on that statement. Scholar, they said they'll have their pet actions revised. Based on the pet thing we had earlier, you know, that should be obvious. And direct heals and barrier magics will be adjusted. All they specifically stated is that Scholar's kind of been the OP in the past, and that there really shouldn't be a pure OP based on the changes that come from the expansion. So that Scholar should still feel really good, but it shouldn't be the clear, you know, head and heels above choice, which for me, it wasn't. Like it was, and it was always a great choice, but for me, it was really the third job, Astro, that threw a wrench in the healer balance back in 3.0, and they even acknowledged that in recent interviews and media posts prior to the media tour, Astro being kind of the problem child. So they've said here is Astro's stances, its card effects have been adjusted, and there's a lot we can pull from that based on the job action trailer, but not a lot we can pull from this actual slide right here. Now, they did specifically state, it's not like these jobs don't have DPS actions. Even in the trailer, you can see DPS actions. But the shift into a more healer-focused role to fit what your job role says it is seems to be what they're aiming for. So, you know, we don't know. We don't know how it'll actually work out. There's a bullet point skipped mentioning that damage skills would be addressed as well. They did go back and acknowledge that later, that they weren't like skipping it deliberately, but just that they were acknowledging that, you know, DPS skills are going to be adjusted. For anyone worried that that means that there is going to be like barely any, they specifically mention later when they talk about White Mage that when they were going over how their Lily gauge is going to be working, they mentioned that the Black Lily that you can generate now is used for a majorly powerful offensive skill. So their entire job gauge now has a new feature that allows White Mage to access a powerful offensive skill. So again, it's not going away, but it's a matter of how important it's actually going to be to the performance of your performance in content. So for DPS roles, they went into the least detail. DPS has always been kind of the, you know, as a DPS main, I always feel like I've got the easiest job. You know, some fights have certain requirements of me, but come on, let's be real. We're not tanks, we're not healers. Our job's to put out DPS, and we don't have to worry about all so much outside of what our job is capable of to enhance the people around us. So with that being said, Monk, Dragoon, Ninja, Samurai, Black Mage, and Red Mage, their playstyles are going to remain relatively unchanged, but they didn't really, I guess they went into some additional detail. They mentioned Monk, which we eventually saw later, getting some additions and changes. They mentioned Dragoon staying, you know, being largely consistent with the way it was before. Ninja, they had already mentioned Kasatsu having the multiple charges prior. Samurai, they said mostly unchanged. Black Mage, they did a little bit of gameplay preview and showed that they fixed some things. For example, Black Mages, and this is something Yoshida repeated a lot of times, was that when, you know, changing form, you should no longer be losing MP. Basically, he said Blizzard 3 didn't cost MP when moving over from Fire, which it's always been kind of a weird thing with Black Mage. You know, it's always been like these weird MP tick timings. So I'd assume that's specifically what he's mentioning, but he specifically mentioned just swapping form shouldn't cost MP. And then he later mentioned specifically Blizzard 3 by name, so you'd have to assume the change for Fire 3 would be similar, but that's all we can only go with what we got. And Red Mage also remained relatively unchanged. They said that they added a new ability that was shared a cooldown with Displacement, and they did hover over the tooltip, and I think it was called Engagement. and it just said that it dealt damage and shared a cooldown with displacement. So because it doesn't mention anything about front flipping, back flipping, anything like that, it seems to be an option to use, I guess, a melee skill without having to jump back, which I'm sure many of you red mages are well aware of the hilarity that can ensue when you maybe go a little too far off the edge of Titan or Suzaku. Good times. Anyway, moving on. This is when they went to the second half, and from this point on, it looks like I need another Imgur folder, so unless it's in the next post, this is only the first half of the actual live letter. Now, I can speak very clearly to the stuff they mentioned in the second half, but if anyone from the Twitch chat actually has anything, no, they said that that's all of them. Okay, well then we can go over some of the other stuff that's mentioned in the second half real quick without, I guess, needing to have any sort of visual aids, because the rest of the things was them, I guess, logging into the game and going over some basic actions. For example, they mentioned that Bard, for example, with Bard, Machinist, and Summoner. Machinist, they said, basically an entirely new job. Their own words, not mine. Summoner, they said, definitely got some changes. Bard definitely got some changes. They should be shoring up their gameplay, but they're only partially reworked. And you can see that when we eventually watch the job action trailer, that they've definitely gotten adjustments to the way they're expected to be played. For example, Summoner having instant cast summons, for example, not needing to worry about going into a battle without ether flow or not having ether flow beforehand. We saw in the job action trailer only 2 ether flow stacks, or I guess something that would be equivalent to ether flow. And then Bard, Bard's a lot of just kind of breaking down the job action, because Bard, they specifically said while they were nerfing the synergies between jobs that they'd be getting rid of the passive crit buff on the songs that you have, but adjusting the rest of their gameplay altogether. And unfortunately, without breaking down the job action trailer or going way beyond what's actually spoken about here, we can't really dive too much deeper into that. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm very quickly going to consult my Twitch chat. Is there anything that I missed that wasn't from the job action trailer that we can talk about here? Obviously, Dancer is a big thing, but we are going to be covering a lot more job-related stuff in the job action trailer and relating it to the live gameplay that they actually showed. So does anybody have any sort of, I guess, anything at all that I maybe mentioned? They mentioned a Final Fantasy XIV controller. The next live letter is another thing that was mentioned. That's going to be at E3, if I'm not mistaken. They said June 14th. There is also going to be another Eorzean Symphony. And I feel like there's one other thing that we are going to be having right there. The controller for lefties. That was another thing that they showed. And the benchmark. As of this recording, it is currently 6:51 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on May 23rd. At 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, in 9 minutes, the benchmark is going to be available. The trailer's already available online. It's going to be harder to break down the trailer this time because we'll have already seen the job action trailer literally within hours of it. So we'll do what we can, but we'll probably be doing a video going over the character creation options for VR and Hrothgar, and I'll probably be recording that very shortly after this. For those of you wondering about the benchmark, and I will be mentioning it in the video for it, it will be available for download on the Lodestone at the mentioned time, 7 p.m. Pacific, which those of you watching on YouTube, it's already well past that, trust me. And you don't need an active subscription to try it, and it's strictly for PC. The main function of the benchmark is to test your PC to see if it can run the game. Now, while yes, a character creator is really cool, and yes, you can even take what characters you make on the benchmark and eventually transfer them onto the live servers by copying the files and using them later on, its main function is to test your PC. So PS4 players, Mac players, which technically is a computer, I suppose, but it's only available on the regular PC client, not on the Mac client. If you do want to try out the character creator, you're going to have to download it on your PC, even if it's not the platform you play the game on. So, with that, although I'm seeing some things in my chat that is making me wonder some certain things. Regardless, anyway, I think that's it. I don't think there's anything from the live letter that I didn't mention that I'm not going to mention in the job action trailer overview. But this has been really tough because, you know, I've got a ton of content coming out Wednesday. You guys will not be disappointed with the content that everyone who attended the media tour put out. And it's really hard to do these videos. So I feel like we got through this relatively well. So thank you everyone for understanding that we have to kind of play dumb a little bit. I think that's the bottom line until Wednesday actually comes around. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this recording. Get ready to download the benchmark in a few minutes, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and stay tuned because your inboxes are going to be annihilated on Wednesday. 6 a.m. Be there. Anyway, I'm going to hang out with my Twitch chat while we wait for the benchmark to go live. So thank you on YouTube. I'll see you guys next time. And until then, take care.